Zoo Dirty Weekend speakers, full range speakers, special speakers for special people. Let's find out why. So what do they like? They like acoustic, and they like vocals, and they like it when there's only a few instruments playing at a time. What they don't like is more synthetic-y stuff. Where does this speaker shine? You need to have really transparent sounding gear. So if everything is dialed in already and you spent too much money on your stuff, then you might have a sublime experience listening to these. It's picky. It's picky. But that's fine. It has standards. And it deserves to have standards, because when you give it what it wants, it's unmatched by other speaker topologies? No. Types. Hard rock and metal you can't really jam with those, because that's the weakness of one driver trying to do a whole bunch of instruments. Like, it has to move in order to recreate each one of those instruments. And it's much easier for a speaker that has multiple crossed over drivers, like your typical 2 or 3-way speaker, because it's sharing the workload. Audiophiles have been into full range drivers below the radar for many years. The Lowther PM6, I believe it is one of the more famous ones. They've been relegated mostly to weirdos like us that will build our own speakers. So let's talk about the single driver design. It's fairly novel. Usually single drivers are just sold by themselves because they're just for audiophiles, basically, who have the wherewithal and the motivation to build their own cabinets or open baffle cabinets. It's unusual for a company to build a single driver. They do it, but not a lot. So I should tell you what amps have worked best for me with these. The Sansui AU717 amp section, but with a Threshold SL10 preamp hooked up to it. Because the preamp on that AU717 isn't up to the task of these speakers. As far as, it'll sound fine, but if you want it to sound fantastic, if you really want to get that nuance, you need like a really squeaky clean preamp, and that's what that Threshold provides. The other receiver that worked really well with it is a Tandberg TR2055, which is a weird Norwegian receiver from like 1977 or 76, and that just sings. It just makes the mid-range come through on vocals and stuff. Kind of like a tube amp, kind of like it puts soul into it. If you haven't heard soul come through your speakers, then it's hard to describe, but definitely something that you want. You really don't know until you try it whether it's going to be a good match. First of all, amps have output impedances which are never really listed, and if there are tests of them, I don't know where to find them. And so what that's going to tell you is how much current that thing is going to put into your speaker at a different frequency. It's frequency dependent. So, even if you did have the output impedance published somewhere, you wouldn't know how it would react exactly to your speakers, because your speakers have input impedances that also vary throughout the frequencies. So what you're looking for is somehow for those two output and input impedances to match in a way that is pleasing to the ear. And then you have the whole thing of, room dependence and the textures in your room and your own personal hearing and stuff. Anyway, there are too many variables to really account for just by looking at, white papers. So your best bet is to, read reviews, watch reviews like this one, and find out what's worked for other people, Or if you have a ton of amps, then you're going to have a great time, because then you can just cycle through all those amps until you find a good dancing partner for these particular speakers. The treble is good. It's accurate. Never in your face. You can use bright gear with these, and it's never going to punish you for it. The tweeter, I think it just has one cap in the signal path for the tweeter. And it's crossed over relatively high, like, 10,000 or higher hertz. And it's lower. Generally the tweeters are at eye level or ear level. But in this case, they're below the woofer, and so you're going to get a different listening experience sitting down and standing up. But it's never harsh. The bass is nice. It's very dependent on positioning, though. It's got a unique port design. So the ports are on the bottom, and they're these kind of strangely shaped slots. And so you can adjust the bass by raising or lowering it, each speaker, or you can obviously move it closer to the wall if you want more. But it's a 10-inch paper cone woofer, so in a medium-sized room, it's going to give you a nice amount of bass. It doesn't go super deep, but it's not like an EDM speaker, It's like a rock, folk, bluegrass, acapella, anything that's more organic sounding. These things really shine, and especially if it's well recorded. It doesn't mask anything. In fact, if you're testing interconnects, which I've done with these, you're gonna hear the difference in your interconnects. Every single pair, you're gonna hear the difference through these speakers, because they just reveal everything, the whole path of signal, and so keep that in mind. Mid-range. Paper cones are the best thing for mid-range on the planet, and that's what these have. And so your mid-range, if you got all that in place, is gonna be really nice, really a level above what you're used to in traditional speakers that have a crossed over tweeter woofer mid-range, what have you. Drums. It pops up real fast, and then it kind of whittles down just as fast. So it covers a whole gamut of frequencies. And so I find that it's a good way to see what the transient response of a speaker is. And these things have an outstanding transient response, because just for one example, like Earth, Wind, and Fire, Let's Groove Tonight, there's a drum coming from one side that sounds exactly like a drum. And that can't be said for most speakers. The clarity of a drum is very obvious. Once you've heard it sound like a drum, then when you hear it on other systems, it just sounds like a thud. That's one of those little treats you get when you listen to this type of speaker. So what's the answer? Do you get these? Yes. But no, you can't. You should, though. If you find them used, snap them up fast. Get them fast. They're good. And then one other thing. They're made in Utah. I was a machinist, and as you can see, the machining on these things is beautiful. It's really, done with a fine finish, and that's not cheap. So even though the models that are still for sale are around $2,500, they're still an excellent value. These things, they were giving them away. I mean, for $1,000 when they first went on sale, and I think they went up to $1,100 or $1,200. They were still just giving them away. I mean, that is ridiculously low, and so I'm thankful that they did that. But at the same time, I wish that the economics were different and they could have continued. But I mean, I would totally recommend to anybody to try the next step up model, because for an American made product of this quality and this amount of develop R&D put into it, it's just, it's like next level shit.